Welcome. I might repeat myself over the next few minutes. My name is Naya Bricker. I'm the Administration, Technology, and Development Coordinator at the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown. I would love to know where you are based as an audience member. We're going to be using two different Zoom tools tonight, the chat and the Q&A. Both are located at the edge of your screen, probably at the bottom if you're on a computer, maybe up at the top if you're on a phone or a tablet. So take a moment, find that chat button and share where you're from. I'll read them out so all of our panelists can know where our audience is based tonight. I'm also going to go over a few little housekeeping tips. The first one being if you get disconnected or if your audio quality isn't as great or video freezes, I would recommend leaving this webinar, going back to your inbox, clicking on the link, and then rejoining. It'll let you right back in. I also want you to know that tonight's presentation will be recorded. I will send out an access link to the recording afterwards for everyone that's registered for the event. So if you have to leave early, we will miss you, but please know you can catch up. So let's see, we've got New Haven, exclamation point, NYC, Lower East Side, we've got Truro, we've got East Village, Pittsburgh, a hello to Melissa, excited for this, Kent, Connecticut, Knife River, Minnesota, North Shore of Lake Superior, Cleveland, CMU Pittsburgh, Bushwick, Providence, amazing, a lot of New England, and a little more. New Paltz, all right. If anyone, hello to Andrew and Angela from Emmett and Audrey in Clinton Hill. So the chat will be running throughout the entire event. Feel free to leave more comments, ask questions throughout. And let's see, we're gonna switch over and pass the virtual mic over to my colleague, Kelly Groom, our Director of Education Programs.
Welcome to Opening to Wonder. I'm Kelly Groom. Thank you for joining us and supporting the Fine Arts Work Center. Tonight, we are thrilled to host Angela Dufresne, Melissa Ragona, Andrew Woolbright, Mala Iqbal, and Joiri Minaya for Phantom Bodies, the Haptic Unhinged. Opening to Wonder was created in 2020 as a virtual series of conversations on the creative process to help keep us connected and to provide crucial support for the Work Center. All of our presenters are donating their time, giving a gift to the Work Center, which has been a gift to writers and artists for over 50 years. A special thank you to our spring advisory group who created our new series on the visual arts. Esteban Del Valle, Bert Yarborough, and Kate Clark, all of whom are Fine Arts Work Center Fellows and members of the Visual Arts Committee. Our Opening to Wonder advisors also appear as special guests throughout the series, and tonight we are very glad to have Bert Yarborough with us to introduce our presenters. So thank you so much, Bert.
Thanks, Kelly, and thank all of you. We appreciate you all coming to support and attend this event for the Fine Arts Work Center. I also want to thank Kelly and Naya Bricker for all the hard work they've done in helping put this together. It's our pleasure to present to you this evening, Phantom Bodies, the Haptic Unhinged. This talk will address the contemporary shift within figurative painting, which rejects the Western canonical fixation of depicting flesh through paint as a vehicle of desire and the gaze. Angela Dufresne, Melissa Ragona, Andrew Woolbright, Mala Iqbal, and Joiri Minaya will discuss this shift through the valences of affect theory, post-humanist theory, and phantom limbs, while discussing new figurative interest in avatars, sensuous bodies, spectrality, and virtual presence, attempting to evaluate it along its political and theoretical implications, limitations, and advantages. This will be moderated by Angela Dufresne, and she will introduce to you all our participants. So I'll turn it over to Angie.
I know that people who know me are probably horrified at the thought of me modifying anything, but I'm going to go for this. Hi, everyone. I love seeing Nikki Woods and I think 2 Estebans and 2 Miras somehow. 2 Miras shores are better than 1, I'd say. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to jump right in because we have a lot to talk about. And yeah, hi, Nikki. Oh my God. 2 fast for love. Anyway, she knows what that means. I'm going to jump in and just start to share my screen and just like jump into the presentation that we've put together. Because we do have a lot of content to cover. And I want to also do some things like proper adults should do these days. So hold on a second. Let me just get to presenter view. Great. How's that look, everyone? We got a full screen and no bullshit. Can I get a okay? We're gonna jump right in. First, I want to do a land acknowledgement for P-Town, which was originally the Nauset people, as I understand it. Now, if anybody would like to type in the chat or something, a correction on this, I did some research on this, but I am by no means an expert in these histories, nor would I want to claim to be that. But the Fine Arts Work Center, as I understand it, originally exists on that peninsula of the Cape, that the Nauset Indians occupied when the colonization happens, in which in 1864, English explorer Captain Thomas Hunt captured 7 Nauset Indians, as well as 21 Wampanoag Indians, then in 1620 they did a retaliatory attack and sent the pilgrims from Provincetown off to Plymouth. Hence the American Foundation myth. I thought we'd get that straight. We could just start there since we're talking about decentralizing the colonialist imaginative space. The Mashpee Wampanoag lived in what we know as the current day Provincetown, and they are also known as the people of the first light, and they inhabited the area of the Cape west of the Bass River. The Nauset people were east of the Bass River, and they've been there for 12,000 years, as far as we know, as far as evidence provides, and they were only acknowledged by our federal government a recognizable tribeship status in 2007. I don't think I need to say anything else there. Okay, and since I'm in Brooklyn, I'll say that Brooklyn is in fact the Lenape people, which they also have this wonderful word that sometimes my dyslexic mind implodes, the Lenapehoking, or the land of the Lenape, which were the offspring of the Algonquin civilization, which is what the colonists encountered when they arrived around this peninsula in Brooklyn is where you can see Brooklyn below that beautiful thing known as the Hudson River in that little armpit where Staten Island, Manhattan, blah, blah, blah. That's where I am, somewhere in that space on the Lenape land. So yeah, thank you. Our ancestors, the people who rightfully possess this land. Anyway, so now I'm going to go on to our conversation. I want to say these are some of my entry points. I'm looking forward to all the point of views that we're going to talk about tonight, and we certainly don't want to make or present a consensus here because that would be disgusting, or make too much sense because that would be tedious or dangerous even. So I personally became interested in phantom figurations, or what I maybe would call ontologically porous bodies, of course, for pathways to escape from the norms of beauty and of course of womanhood or a woman non-subject position. A soft, or in my case, maybe more specifically, a soft, butch, non-trust fund, cis white female tedium. But also kind of fabulous in my own way. I was building a audience in my community at once as an artist ought to do and thinking about these ideas. Of course, leaving behind conversations around what is or isn't happening in painting helped me, and the Work Center helped me get to that place to kind of excavate myself from the vernacular provincial conversations of art critics. So when I think of like somehow Jerry Salt's still pitching for a authentic, fearless, or unless it's Richard Prince, of course, God help us, authentic positionality of a painter. Anyway, I started to gain this clarity in the months I spent as a fellow at FOC, and many of the relationships expressed in these ideas and future exhibitions, which we're planning around this concept of phantom bodies, I was able to develop outside of economic and success matrices that were because I was a fellow at the Work Center. Okay, so now I'm going to introduce our panelists. There's a little bit of my whatever post-structuralist feminist intro. Now let's go on to our amazing peoples. Melissa Ragona is an associate professor of critical theory, history in the school of at the School of Art in Carnegie Mellon University. And she's an independent curator and critic. Her book manuscript, The Warhol Tapes Beyond Ready-Made Sound, is forthcoming. And she's written a ton of essays for different publications and monographs, most notably Carolee Schneemann, Goddess of Goddesses. And not a goddess, an actual human, normal person. Anyway. And Andrew Paul Woolbright is an artist, writer, curator living in Brooklyn. Woolbright founded the gallery Super Duchess, which I think is going to go through a name mutation soon. Anyway, in New York City, he writes for Two Coats of Paints, Momus, Efflux, among other publications. And he's curated a really amazing show at the Dorsky Museum that's up right now. Andrew, help me. What is her name? I'm just like, I did not make the note of that. Shout that out or add it to it.
Kathy Goodell.
Kathy Goodell, thank you. Kathy, you're amazing. I love the show, it looks so amazing, and I haven't gotten to see it yet. But he is also working on a show with Melissa and I as a triplex of curators around this theme that Andrew developed in his article, Phantom Body Avatars, Weightless Bodies, and the End of Skin for White Hot Magazine last spring. And this show will potentially will travel to Gallery Vacancy in Shanghai and will occur in New York City at the Hole this summer, opening July 1st. Mala Iqbal is a visual artist fellow from 99 to 2000, and then another time, but somehow her bio says 2000 to 2000. I know she was a fellow twice, and that is where I met her over 20 years ago. She was born in the Bronx and grew up in a household where 3 cultures and 4 languages intersected. Her most recent solo show was at Taylor University in Upland, Indiana. Her work has been exhibited all over the place. And she's also a just core member of the jury for the Work Center and an amazing artist. Hold on, doing this. Joiri Minaya, I still butchered it. I'm sorry, Joiri. Minaya is a Dominican United Statesian, love that, multidisciplinary artist whose work investigates the female body within constructions of identity, multicultural, social spaces, and hierarchies. She's exhibited internationally across the Caribbean and the US, won a Nancy Graves Foundation Award, a Rima Hort Mann Foundation Emerging Artist Grant, Joe Mitchell Emerging Artist Grant, the Great Prize of the Audience Award 25, Concurso de Art Eduardo Leon Jimenez in the Dominican Republic. And I'm always going to want to pronounce Spanish as Italian, and that's why my brain turns into mush when I try to speak Spanish. Very sorry. Okay. So I'm going to give a little bit of introduction to like my frame of the curation before people jump in. Just a little background. This is the work of Jeff Chadsey. He's going to be in the exhibition. We all agree actually fits quite wonderfully. Well, fits is not the right word, but in many ways manifests and articulates the concepts around this idea of haptic bodies and phantom limb and so on. I'm desperate to leave the discourses around the analysis of beauty or the interrogations of its gazes as a way to critically engage or survive, actually. So to seek other fabulations, as Donna Haraway calls them, forces that defy more than destabilize models of perceptions and just don't give a fuck about what Patrick Bateman or Bill Clinton or even Michael Jordan think of mine or their assets. I love Luce Ergoe, but I couldn't swallow the giant whatever loads of white Euro male centrality as the access of all subjectivity, even if it was still. Fuck these models of living, survival, and success anyway. Once and for all, I tried to extract myself from these molds, however futile this is as a project. There are more powerful BIPOC women and men who have successfully done this than myself. Many in this show, thank you, Caitlin Cherry, these shows that we'll be carrying. So yeah, thank you, Caitlin Cherry, Mala Iqbal, Nicole Miller, Joiri, Didier Williams, Terrence James, Dwayne Slick, for forging new or turning to other models of analysis, seeing, being, and interrogating. So yeah, thank you all. I also want to thank my godmother, Carol Rama, who I've managed to procure works for to be in the show at the whole, who has managed to imagine the kind of viscerality of the female body more ravenously and obscenely and delightfully than any artist I can imagine. So yes, again, the exhibitions will be at Gallery Vacancy and the whole. So Jeff Chadsey Jeff Chadsey's psychosexual fantasies are reflective of today's hybrid youth culture and our hybrid identities, challenging our facility to read the signs of masculinity, femininity, race, attitude, and expression. Chadsey's images spin a complex web of emotion and desire. Vitruvian man suffered the slings and arrows of modernist distortion no mainstream culture has caught up with cinema, sports, and political heroes now being revealed as clay-footed as the rest of us. There is no prevailing masculine norm. It's more complicated and realistic. The neoliberal subject, which is a point for me in terms of anchoring the spin of this conversation, we delete you from our cart. Okay, we're trying to, or we're just adapting and fucking with you till we can use you. We can turn you away from you and your reifications, or even to leverage criticality at you to reify you yet again. Another reification of your standards. Basta, really, we're done. The artists we're presenting here are done with the naturalized neoliberal subject and no longer use said normatives as systems, again, as evaluation or knowledge, even knowledge building, or we try. The figures in this crowd draw us all as phantoms, potent, rogue, tail ends of traditions without corporate backers. Those who might cooperate or even encapsulate simian species, perverts with fellow perverts ready to roll and willing to miss work. Shoplifters in an empty supermarket, not zombies. Fuck your apocalypses too. We did that a long time ago, assholes already. That's your fantastic, not ours. QAnon, we're done with you too. Actually, we'd nevered with you. So like, duh. Our folks have figured out how to live with this shit as hypernatural, riding on synthetic armatures made for other purposes than such flights, which is on vacuum cleaner broomsticks. They are artificially non-cognitive, even though they ooze empathy. Yeah, maybe gay monsters, but also passive aggressiveness to non-productive ends against the American milk every second for cash headspace. William E. Jones. So this is an example of Jeff and I had done a show at RISD when I first started teaching there about 10 years after we met as fellows. I wanted to throw that in. So William E. Jones is a person I collaborate with and who is an artist that will be in this exhibition. His video, which I won't show because I'm gonna not, I was gonna show a clip, but I don't think there's time, is called, it's called What Are You Doing? And it's a film that's a series of clips. You can search it on his Vimeo page, it's public. It's a series of clips that he's downloaded from, appropriated from online, various sources it's very decomposed VHS video content that range from Spanish bullfights to soap operas to television ads. And he's done massive interventions in Photoshop with each frame singularly. And then often, as is the case with William's work, he then plays the original footage so that you're aware of both the translation, the mutation, the disassociation, and the existing archive. And I've been collaborating with him on what I actually think of in a way as a kind of extension of this idea of either death of author or, in fact, this kind of perverted queering of the idea of commission. I made an entire show in Los Angeles called Angela E. Jones. Well, there it is in a nutshell. Angela Dufresne as William E. Jones's painting Bottom. And I basically made a series of paintings that William prompted me to do, which started when I painted this portrait of him on the right. The first one that I made is the one on the left, which is a beheading that he really wanted me to paint. He's very into all kinds of obscene and violent Christian iconography. So that's the Vimeo link, but I'm going to, it was just exhibited for the first time at a townhouse in Los Angeles in a show called Pathologically Social, which I like this title because I actually think that the orientation, sociality of the way this show is being curated is kind of pathologically social. I sort of run around in packs and tribes everywhere I go, and it's always a kind of commons of decision making and non-hierarchy and so on and so forth. So it's a kind of pathological social in the sense that it doesn't, mirror the kind of hierarchical structures of neoliberal corporate or academic hierarchies. All right, so this is just an example of one of the paintings. This is called Stalin's Vagina. William was going to write a science fiction novel called that. It's a long story, but just an example of some of the range of images that we came up with. This one is a riff on Medea, which I also kind of affectionately call a late term abortion painting. It's basically a kind of articulation of what Toni Morrison expressed in Beloved, in the sense that the mother does not, of course, want her children to be born into slavery or subjectness. Yeah, and there was a lot of precedence for that, from Maria Callas to the great Lars van Trier version, which it's amazing to think a feminist could actually say that. But if you haven't seen it, you should see it. So this is just another example of some of the works that are made in conversation with William. And this I'll leave that because then Melissa is going to talk about some things that I do in Surface. So I'll try to get through this. This is called Golden Showers of Love, and this was not a prompt. This was basically an accumulation of paintings I've been doing, although William is front and center. But this painting is about how children, well, it's about many things, but this is one frame in which to think about it that I think ties into our thematic tonight, which is that children are by no means thematic, and the kind of normalizing, making of innocent that heteronormative familiar structures take away the demonic and the agency and the power from the young developing eros of children. And so this is a 7 by 12 foot painting. This is also 7 by 12 foot. So the counterposes of the bar to the clean, hygienic spaces of heteronormal domesticity. The figure in these works are simultaneously an interior and an exterior, a whorish porous. These spaces, heterotopic spaces in Foucault's terms, like mirrors with holes, bells, and whistles, where the surfaces give way to depth and the depth is revealed as illusory. Like the mirror pools, these figures offer confused arrays of surfaces. Their planes do not hit the eye on top of one another, but confuse perspectival vantage points in a mixed relation between foreground and background. And this is also kind of about a sort of hauntologies read on the past, of course, haunting the present, and the present being also haunted by the desire of some kind of useful future. Okay, we're getting there. Perverse, okay, hold on. We should recognize the children's animated, the children's animated development is immature, yes, but desiring subjects which do so from a wide range of perverse embodiments and relations, rather than protesting the presence of queer characteristics or rebellious impulses in these bodies. I sort of seek to disrupt the idealized saccharine myths about childhood, sexuality, innocence, and imagine new versions of maturation. This crazy German pedagogical term called Bildung, which is German for creation, image, shape, wherein philosophy and education are linked in a manner that refer to processes of both personal and cultural maturation. And so then at its core, it's a growth process that does not depend upon the logic of succession or success. This is key to how I think about countering the canonical and to a certain extent, the white neoliberal subject. Okay, I want to talk about Dwayne Slick, who is also a core member of Provincetown community and will be partaking in these exhibitions with us, and I have ongoing discussions with him. Dwayne says that narrative traditions tell a story. To tell a story of a tragedy, one must always begin by telling the ending first. I once believed that the weight of such expectations functioned as a cultural given for the artist of the Native American descent. Its rules stated that we cry for a vision and place ourselves in a single grand narrative of history and representation. But the laughter of the coyote saturated and filled our daily lives. It echoed through the lecture halls of the histories, and it was so powerful and it was so distracting that I forgot my place in linear time. And now I worked for an untraceable present. And I'm adding this: there is no endings. Thank you, Dwayne. It's so beautiful what you wrote there. I don't even know where to begin. So Slick blends the subjects of oral and visual Native traditions with a focus on trickster strategies, modernist and postmodern painting histories. And this is one of the black and white American flag series titled Untraceable Present, related to that quote, that explored that that explore the contradictions and legacies of Native American identity and the grand narratives of our ridiculous history. His recent work ruminates on the experiences of metaphysical economies through visual schematics and visual influences of pattern design and woodland nations of the Northeast. This is the painting that I love this painting on the left. I love them all. He's absolutely a masterful, a miraculous painter. But I want to tell the story of this turning around on purpose, which I think is a kind of cut away, is a looking away, and is a kind of way of what I think we're thinking about in terms of this idea of phantom in the language around these ideas we're sharing. So Dwayne was living in Fort Greene in the late 80s, and a show opened at Artist Space curated by Jimmy Durham. There were two shows at that time. The Artist Space show was titled We the People, and the other show, which was at one of the SUNY schools, which I didn't remember, were called We Are Always Turning Around on Purpose. It was a landmark event, Dwayne says, as there was no visible or contemporary Native artists who were not working with romantic images. I think we all know what those are. So I saw the show at Artist Space, and it was very encouraging as a young 23-year-old. Fast forward 2013, and this blue coyote visits my studio and continues to appear as unknowable to the viewer. I saw it as a partial form or strategy of self-preservation, cultural preservation from the mainstream market of understanding. The way the coyote sees it, there must be a reason that viewers are also called consumers. The coyote is not on the menu tonight. turning around on purpose. Now I'm back in my voice. We are purposefully turning around to propose looking the other way with all the tools and technology capitalism deploys on us to make us look forward optimistically, progressively, to want it. What we make gets messy. Thankfully, ontological logic of the Western male subject gets lost, but that's okay. This menu isn't for them. And if they're on it, it's because we've metabolized, disidentified them, or they've done so themselves. And yes, we might fail to escape these cycles, but we'll keep trying. That's me.
Yeah, so for everyone, I mean, Angela was a professor of mine at RISD, and pathologically social is absolutely one of the things she taught me the most, perhaps, is how to develop what I think amounts to a meaningful life through these wonderful rhizomatic relationships and taking advantage of how social being an artist is and needs to be to really exist beyond any type of just kind of aesthetic. But the other thing, you know, that was kind of in my mind with everything, I guess I'll start with myself and then we can open it up to like the larger show, but it feels like the thing of interest maybe for me with talking with Angela and Melissa specifically was this decentering of the human experience, the decentering of the liberal subject. And it seems like post-human philosophy has finally found its way into studios, as philosophy sometimes takes time to kind of do so. And part of that is that sociality that Angela teaches so well to everyone who goes through RISD, this like chorality or this like infinite coral reef of like bringing together different tribes, as she calls them, or different groupings of people, and like finding ways to make it more creative and strange and weird and non-productive and anti-capitalist. But it's also, I mean, I think, and this is something we can talk about in the discussion, it's interesting because I think there are material reasonings for post-humanism finally catching up to figuration. I mean, environmental collapse makes it difficult to believe in the individual experience much. Certainly the events of last summer and now, and realizing that there's very little political willpower to address incredibly, you know, incredible inequalities, racial violence, colonizing violence. And there is very little ability to like hit the politics button and for it to do something. And I think a lot of artists in the show are returning to an idea of organizing and working together towards trying to solve these things. And in so doing, re-questioning like why we're painting portraits or like single people, when we have to acknowledge that it's going to take grassroots efforts and kind of this like whole grouping, macro grouping of people to solve any of these problems. And also I think the other reason maybe is like virtuality finally very much affecting visuality, that the language, like generations are now growing up completely on the internet, playing video games, spending time online through avatars. And I think that's finally affecting the way we think of pictorial space. And it's decentering the experience when we can interject bodies that die and respawn and personas endlessly with like the accounts that we take on online. But all that being said, for me, it's getting to be an exciting time with figuration. And early on, I was making these groupings of figures, thinking about love and trying to imagine like what maybe a Chagall'ian avant-garde would look like, a Marc Chagall avant-garde that was more about relationships and love and sentiment. And I was thinking about this kind of Baroque framing of things for both of these. We can keep going forward, Angela. I don't have much to say about these. But also thinking about kind of this swarm of figures where you can't tell whose hand that is or whose leg that is or body. It's all just kind of like in a cloud a cloud of people walking together, like kind of like a three-legged race, and interested in like what love and what common goals do to people, of like making us into a three-legged race. Or it's like there's like kind of a Midwestern punishment of like making two siblings wear like the same big oversized sweater. And that's like a type of figuration I'm interested in, of like, for us to move forward, we have to figure out how to take a step with our third leg together. And this painting is a painting I did. This is the first painting I did last February, before COVID. A fire burned down my studio and 10 years worth of work. So I had to kind of start from scratch and pick my next moves carefully. And for me, that meant returning to color, thinking about color as a material and not as a medium or a specific medium. And I kept returning to this image of Blake's Nebuchadnezzar, this like kind of humiliation that comes with being an artist, but it's a, obviously a virtue and a beauty to being constantly returned and set back to zero, is something that we can keep growing from. And I realized that when I came back to painting, I wanted to do so with less of a relationship to the history of this like canonical idea of oil painting. I wanted to come back with this visuality that's like more attached to the way we see the world now. And that ended up being, for me, thinking about how most of my students are playing video games all the time. And thinking about the way color is used in phone apps and video games to create addiction, to try to keep you in game for as long as humanly possible. And thinking about color not as CMYK, but RGB, and how these color palettes, which I steal directly from some of these video games, are meant to defer catharsis forever. It's meant to just kind of be this candy land of colors that keep you in the world. So for me, been thinking about colors as kind of bug zapper, which a lot of the artists in this show have different bug zappers that they've kind of set up. But for me, color is the lure to then hopefully attempt to think about this non-hierarchical way of being that conflates like the visuality of art history with the future, with the present, and trying to kind of like pose painting as like the proposal for a video game that I have zero interest in ever making, but it's like running into characters that are like William Blake or Hypatia or Agnes Varda, kind of like yelling at you and giving you advice on how to move forward. A lot of these almost every character I paint has a gun, just because I think it's hard to depict an American experience without them kind of being glued or taped to the American hand. This painting, though, is based on a dream I had, where my cell phone broke and all this like weird goo came out of it. So I felt like I wanted to try to paint that. And I think we can, yeah. And then, but this is like one of my most recent paintings. And for me, I think about non-hierarchy as this type of marbling. I've been thinking about the word marbling a lot. And the idea of this like different body parts all kind of forming this like Baroque, and Baroque, the torsadus colonnade is this like twisting, of pillars, or this like kind of rotation or torque that's being invented. And I've been thinking about figures as this kind of twisting, marbling creation. And so the painting on the left, it's called Tekken Goddess. There's an arm from a video game in it. There's also the leg on the right is a coral reef with the foot of Christ from Grunwald's Eisenheim altarpiece, which is one of like the weirdest painted feet I've ever seen. And then on the other foot is a big bird's foot, because I think that Jim Henson and Grunwald had a lot in common. Trying to like visualize ethics and morality in this like kind of theatrical way. But And I've also been thinking of like logos and company logos, trying to remind, I've been doing figurative and narrative painting for most of my life, last like 15 years. And I've been trying to disrupt it a little bit and bring in logos and different things to remind myself and disrupt the idea that there's any type of illusion. I really want this to appear like it's this heavily loaded thing we're doing when we're putting an image on canvas with color. So reminding us of that with like Advantech, which is a flooring company. I think it's very funny when companies are called tech and they have like nothing to do with tech. There's a surprising amount of them. And I think, yeah, so all that being said, a lot of the artists that I've been really interested in, and going back to, I believe I did a studio visit with Emma Stern, I want to say in like 2016 for a show I was putting together at Super Duchess. And during the conversation, we realized we had very similar, we were taught very similarly to think through figuration in art. Both of us were kind of taught this like lineage of like Chaim Soutine that led into, or Rembrandt that led into Soutine that led into eventually Lucian Freud and then Jenny Saville, and this idea of like fleshy materiality, of flesh thing, and that really being beaten into our heads that that's how you had to relate to figuration. And both of us had come out the other side having almost no relationship to that thick impasto way of painting flesh. And I found that really liberating because Emma was downloading these 3D avatars off the internet, off kind of the darker parts of the dark web, that were created by 3D developers, and they were incredibly fetishized. They were infantilized girls that were like overly sexual, and they were made as fetish objects and like made anonymously and just left on the internet. And Emma started downloading them and working with them and painting in this very like built up glazing way of painting, like almost like LARPing as a court painter of these like digital models, trying to give them some kind of like real presence when their whole existence was just to be consumed. So she started naming them and developing this painting practice, like introducing them into space, and I was really fascinated by that. I was also really into this show that I didn't get to see in person, but it was back in 2016. Chris Coy did a show with Anat Ebgi that was all based on the swing painting, but he had rendered it as a 3D model and then was spinning around it through the camera endlessly and was stopping and taking images from inside this 3D model of this painting to make these like really interesting paintings. And I love the viewpoint specifically of the one in the swing where like the woman's hand becomes your hand that you're like looking over the edge of. And I like this idea of this like aerial camera, 3D camera spin point of view, this first person point of view that was happening. And so last April, I wrote this piece about phantom bodies. I was reading a lot of Schilder, who writes about body posture, formula, and builds this history based on the word of phantom limbs that, I mean, it was started by like a complete lunatic. But the ideas there are really interesting, like the kind of the larger thought to phantom limbs now is that our minds store physical embodied information so that it can access it quicker, like the way your computer can save a website you go to often to like boot it up faster. And when you lose a limb, your mind is able to access the sensations of that limb very quickly. And I was interested in that in relationship to the end of Lucian Freud, and this flesh idea, and also speaking to a lot of artists that were growing up mostly online and playing with personas and different things. So within that article, I highlighted Root Merck, who's that image on the left, who's making these kind of exquisite Velázquez-y kind of portraits of 3D figures, non-real figures. And I wanted to highlight this group of artists that I was really interested in, who were working with the figure, but in my mind, we're improving upon it because it wasn't falling into the trap of beauty. We're trying to make beautiful bodies. And since the 90s, since Yuskevich and Curran, there's been a real problem in my mind within figuration, which is trying to constantly fight for ground on what is beautiful. Where Yuskevich and Curran were trying to make beauty this like complicit thing, and this thing that they used ironically and then to make you feel guilt. A lot of artists were just trying to tell you what the new beauty should be. And so for me, I was interested in these artists, namely Caitlin Cherry, who was able to do this so well. I wanted to write the article specifically because Caitlin and Angela Dufresne are, I think, the two best living colorists in painting. And
All right, Andrew.
both.
Let's not get too crazy.
I'm sorry, but okay, I'm saying a hot take, but I really do mean that.
But we should.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
This is like this is amazing, and I'm trying to act like monitor the moderator, and we should.
We're good.
Yeah.
Look at Caitlin's work in person.
We didn't say enough about Caitlin, but Melissa will speak to Caitlin, I think.
Yeah.
I'm speaking about Caitlin. I love Caitlin. Caitlin Cherry is in the audience, I believe, and I hope we hear from her later. She should be, she was supposed to, we were going to have her part of this panel because she's been a really main person also on so many levels, philosophically, artistically, writerly, and I'm quoting her a lot in my work. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen because I have my, and I'm going to try to make it quick so we have time for both Mala and Joiri, because this is really, we're going to have to go a little over just so people know. Here I go. Okay, they're here. Before I get to everything, I just want to say quickly, so I've had so amazing, intense discussions with both Andrew and Angela, and I came a little later into the project, and I have a little bit of a different take, even though we cross over so many times in terms of the body and what's happening with it. And I'm trying to write this essay called Surface as Phantom Noise, which hopefully we're going to have a catalog and stuff. So I want to riff both from part of a text I wrote, and I'll come up off the page and I'll try to make it quicker than I had planned. And quoting from a larger text from our curatorial group with Angie, Andrew, myself. We're all still in the process of writing, dreaming, and realizing this exhibition, as well as our ideas for a book. That's what we wanted to do this panel for too. But one of my main interests in the work in this exhibition is the almost extraterrestrial interstitial spaces in it, the grounder material, or what Caitlin Cherry has referred to as the signified goop in her recent review of, and I'm going to quote that later again, Kaja von Seipel's work. In between many of the figures. So I'm trying to locate this somewhere between the notion of a lossy image that refers to the kind of compression in which a lot of information is sacrificed in order to present a legible image, and perhaps the space of sound or noise, in which a kind of invisible but quite present affective space occurs. So I'm going to start this, but this poltergeist idea, keep it in your mind throughout. It's really a great way to think about some of this pop culture. Okay, how do I move this? Oh, right here. Okay, boom. Electrical currents stream across the paintings of Angela Dufresne and Caitlin Cherry, as well as the algorithmically driven bodies in Miles Greenberg's Elville Noir, one of my very favorite recent works. Each work is charged with phantom energy, the kind that conflates objects and people as well as virtual and natural worlds, the kind in which static, normally well-behaved glasses of milk explode in one's hand, the kind in which a chair of its own volition begins dragging itself loudly across the floor, or a phone goes flying across the lap of a suburban girl in Ohio. The signal to noise ratio of these work is equivalent, igniting figure and ground, individual and mass, intelligible and unintelligible sonic visual events. Less interested in skin as an organ than as an image sound average that defines the entire compositional tension of a work. I'm interested in examining how surfaces in these works acts as force, as affect, and how it's activated. And to borrow from our favorite Gilles Deleuze, Spinoza's idea of spiritual automata was a convincing way to present our power of acting or force of existing. The latter exists, he argues, in a continuous line of variation. And it's in this dissimilitude that I want to argue that the incongruities of phantom noise operates across these complex surface-oriented works. So the background and foreground of Dufresne's work shimmers and undulates, forming a kind of phenomenological mesh. Figuration is developed by the negative space that it inhabits. The figures and landscapes are at times, to borrow from Andrew Woolbright, indecipherable, ecological, creating an electrical force that charges the surfaces of her paintings. These works interrogate while simultaneously languish in ambivalent spaces where the fluidity of self is challenged by the social fabric and forces that often exist way outside the frame, galvanizing the conflict and desire her figures embody. Inversely, these works highlight tableau, where the social fabric is electrified by the internal emotion and external cultural conditions of its subject. And I can't go into the whole context of this painting around this forest by the National World War I Museum Memorial in Kansas City, Missouri, maybe later. Okay, good. Where am I? So Dufresne's sardonic reference. No, I don't want to talk about that. Okay. In a similar vein, I'm going to move to Caitlin right away, but a different context. Caitlin Cherry in Domain Vague addresses the complexity of what she's referred to as the inaudible sound that occurs between computer file and painter's canvas. Caitlin is currently writing an incredible essay that will be part of also the catalog book for the show. And that's what I asked her if I could quote from that. It's so great. She's especially interested in what Peter Sherrill has referred to as the degraded image, but often is the case here in terms of calling out the slippage that happens in terms of the representation of Black bodies, in particular femme Black bodies. And there's a lot more to say about how Cherry uses ideas from Aurora and Moray patterns. She addresses ideas of iridescence in the intersection of gender and race, as well as what it means to fetishize a screen, and I want to add a body, to touch it, to manipulate it, to produce color and pattern and other wow effects, as well as code, its ability to obscure. And if you look closely here, you'll see 61355, those numbers floating over the top. But code, as Cherry points out, not only obscures in her works, but is a way to index and catalog and circulate and call these paintings out as commodities that have to be protected. Moving to Peggy Awish's 360-degree video works, which also feature, but in this instance, literally a touchscreen element. In fact, the main way to experience this work, and I don't have time to show her demo videos here, but I had the privilege and the joy of navigating these at the Armory show where they were featured with Microscope Gallery's booth. So one enters this work by touching a screen, which during the time of the pandemic, as you know, included donning a rubber glove to do this, which for me added to this super uncanny, but weirdly erotic queer approach to the work. And among the locations in these 360 videos are the home of Awish's Syrian American aunts who live outside of Pittsburgh, who I had the pleasure of meeting once. In this particular work I'm showing, it's the Rip Van Winkle Bridge in the Hudson Valley, where Awish, as you can see, is distorting herself with this technology. So fabulous. But she also does one with the Unisphere in Flushing in Queens, a subway station in New York, and various indoor-outdoor sites in the contested site of the West Bank. So as I've written elsewhere, and this applies to even Awish's representation of herself here as an actor in her own film, actors in her films are encouraged to be themselves, but often under unusual circumstances. Thus, the results are performances that threaten to interpolate the viewer into uncanny worlds where fiction and documentary collide. Awish does not lead us by the hand through some kind of existentialist narrative. Rather, the audience is left to ponder the line between fact and fiction, acting and experience, memory and presence. She is irreverent to genre. Cheap horror haunts philosophical landscape. Humor penetrates political positions, and gaming replaces drama. Awish intervenes in the process of cinematic viewing in exploitive, informative ways. She wants to manipulate our voyeurism, ape our romantic impulses, and chip away at our over-rationalized positions as spectators. Similarly, the animation and painting work of the fabulous Claudia Bertrand traverses a similar uncanny in suspect ways, especially in her recent series called Be Drunk, which we're probably going to feature in this show. She delivers this video loop, a series of what she calls stop motion painting animations. She starts by collecting videos of drunken subjects who voluntarily upload their raucous evenings to the social networks in order to make them public. She then paints these scenes on canvases, photographs their finished states, and paints over them in the next step. Then these highly mediated works strung together, comic strip style, and become both disturbing but exhilarating animations. And I'm just gonna try to, while I'm talking, play this? Boom, ooh, it's working, cool. Bertrand often contextualizes this work in a broader philosophical sense by referring to Baudelaire's Be Drunk from 1869, in which he encourages everyone to be consistently drunk. And as Bertrand says, being drunk need not be associated with excessive alcohol consumption. It can be caused by anything that brings joy and happiness, creates a positive experience and the feeling of being free from the world, the carefree addiction that gives us mental and emotional satisfaction, but also failure and embarrassment. Ouch. But I want to add that this particular work points not only to drunken, but the kind of hypnotic state that both drugs and alcohol can induce, where fear and pleasure mingle, where ambition and failure wrestle, where the body and its ghost consume each other. It's a place of memory and forgetting, where perhaps only a cinematic map of objects will help the actor find their way out of their own psychic labyrinth. And then I want to end here, I'm almost done, good, on the fabulous, everyone's fabulous, because we love all this work, Kaja van Zijpel's 9 Lives. And I have to read that just quickly, some of those notes, and I'm done, off my phone. Good, because my printer broke as we were speaking. So as we turn to this work of Kaja's, especially a recent exhibition at Company Gallery named 9 Lives, after an Ursula K. Le Guin story, which explores ideas of cloning and challenges the ideas of selfhood, the body, individuality, uniqueness. But here another kind of delirium is presented. Though related to Bertrand's representations, but this time more induced by the drug of capitalism, the swoon of commodified culture, as it both shapes, disciplines, and distorts bodies. Her figures, queer, often Nordic, and she's Nordic, and I want to address that construction of whiteness later, hopefully here, but also in Q&A, almost glaring off the walls of the exhibition space, but also vulnerable in their seeming BDSM toughness, strapped with weapons from material and digital culture. As you can see, helmets and harnesses and exercise machines, baby strollers, sex toys, kitchen equipment, prosthetics. And after talking to Kaja a bit this past week, we learned that these body sculptures are created by the sawing off of limbs from mannequins and other cast silicone forms. There isn't really one body here, but a composite. Where am I here? Yes, created by, boom, composite. In a sense, a slice of white femme culture, getting off on each other's partial, fleeting existence deep within those moments are traces of profoundly, however, erotic lives. As Sarah Ahmed has said, what separates us from others also connects us. And building on this, she claims, a body is a complex composite, always existing between movement and rest. And it is in this tension that affective space exists. And as Cherry wrote in her fabulous review of Kaj's work, such a good writer, artist, everything, Renaissance person, the figures in von Zippel's artworks, with their massive luggage and employment of screen and phone mounts and baby strollers, extend her figure into space in an aggressive manner and demand this space for a different reason. What she seeks to loudly impinge upon through artworks is a heteropatriarchal understanding of society. The spreading within is just because it is employed as a critique, as recalculation of who gets to be represented and how. Caitlin also discusses the interstitial space in these works that she characterizes as being bound together by a kind of goop that is sexually aggressive, while at the same time suggesting something otherworldly and alien. The goop, in a sense, contributes to what Cherry refers to as white spreading, a concept inspired by man spreading. And though difficult for other reviewers to take, the spectacle of whiteness, as Cherry argues, and as I agree, in many ways turns in on itself, cannibalizing its own excess in what seems at first to be an easy sell. I want to introduce, because there's so much more to say there and there is absolutely no time, the fabulous Mala Iqbal, and I have to stop sharing my damn screen, stop the share, and yeah, who works across drawing, animation, text, who's a fabulous artist, and I won't go through all the, you can read the bios. Please welcome Mala Iqbal.
Hey, thanks for that intro, Melissa, and I will also launch right in by sharing screen here. All right, so let's see, is this gonna work? Yeah. I've been keeping sketchbooks that I carry around with me on a regular basis since about 2011. They're usually a mixture of invented characters and observed things. Like, for example, this one is a guy in a bike helmet. And I started doing that while commuting to work on bus and subway to have some way of keeping a bit of an art practice going, because I felt like my life was being devoured by my job. And around the same time, actually from 2010 to 2013, I made hundreds of these black gouache drawings that with a brush and gouache that I ultimately turned into a 140-page book, which was self-published at the end of 2014 with the help of Grace Sullivan, another fine artist and designer. And these images for this book started out being influenced by German fairy tales, Grimm's fairy tales, woodcuts. So I was doing lots of forest imagery, but also by things like this. These are the drawings of Wilhelm Busch, who is most famous for kind of a series of drawings that he did with two characters called Max and Moritz. And they're very often sort of gruesome, satirical tales. He pokes a lot of fun at religious figures. But this is sort of a typical thing where there's thieves trying to enter into a mill, and the miller's daughter, you know, crushes them with a millstone. She like winds another one around an axle. She chops off another person's head with the lid of a trunk. So it's really gruesome, and they're incredibly beautiful drawings. And then I was also at the time looking at a lot of Will Eisner, who's an American cartoonist, and particularly, well, he did many things. I happen to be looking at some of his earlier things from the 40s. I also looked at a lot of George Harriman and Crazy Cat. So these are some more of my drawings from that book. And there was sort of, as I made hundreds of drawings over the course of 3 years, I noticed a lot of I would kind of circle back to repeated themes. And one of those themes was people who were on the move, who were walking through landscapes or moving through landscapes, moving through these invented kind of graffiti influenced forests. And it wasn't clear whether they were sort of like wizards in the sort of fairy tale mode, or, you know, had some kind of special powers, or if they were ordinary people. And then starting in probably 2013, but definitely by 2015, you know, I noticed that suddenly, like, the newspaper was full of images of things that really reminded me of my drawings. So that was really interesting, an interesting experience to feel like the real world was kind of echoing what I had been doing, you know, in my studio in Bushwick. And these, of course, were all of the migrants who were on the move in Europe at the time, mostly from Syria, then also from Afghanistan, Pakistan, Africa, various countries. And, you know, these were all refugees who are sort of like basically invisible people, undocumented people, but they were moving in such large numbers due to proxy wars, due to economic policies, very often originating in the US, that they were in the news like every single day. So at that point, I decided to that I would make work that was in response to those news images. So I made this is a large work on paper, about maybe 60 by 60 inches, called Runners. And again, I wanted to sort of leave it somewhat ambiguous as to what was going on here, who were these people, what were they running from? And then I also did a thing which actually in one of Andrew's slides, you saw the sort of the point of view that's now very common with cell phones, which is like looking down your body or having part of your own body in your image. So I had actually totally ripped this off from my very good friend Mina Hassan, and I put, in this case, a sandaled foot, and my shadow into this painting of people on the run. This is just another example. This is an even bigger one, maybe like 60 inches by almost 8 feet. Another work on paper called Fellow Traveler. And again, with a bunch of, these are all invented people. And that fire in the fire barrel thing was actually directly inspired by the work of Hokusai. I tend to look at a lot of older things in my studio. So I have a lot of Hokusai, some Bonnard, Ensor, on and on. So the reason, of course, that these immigrant stories struck me so strongly, and the reason why I had nomadic images, people traveling in the first place, was that my parents were both immigrants. I come from a family of immigrants, mother German, father Pakistani. They met in the US. And when I was a kid, I'm the one on the left here in the very fetching red flowery outfit. My grandmother and 3 cousins, who are depicted here on the right side of the picture, came and lived with us for about 6 years when I was growing up. And the 2 younger cousins were young enough that they actually called my parents mom and dad, the way that my brother and I did. And we really were like siblings for a good chunk of time. And then it was interesting when their parents finally got out of Iran and came to the US. The kids very easily sort of adapted to that by just calling their parents Ammi and Abu, which is the Urdu term for mom and dad. So they had mom and dad and Ammi and Abu. It all worked out just fine. Just recently, I've actually started doing a thing which I have never done, which is to make paintings and drawings that are drawn from these personal experiences or family memories of my family, and this is like me and my dad having an awkward conversation around the table shortly after my mom died, based on just my memory of many such conversations. And then I also started making some paintings that were based on family stories, so things that I had never actually lived through, but that I had heard about. And in this case, a memory of my mother's from when she was probably about 5 during World War II in Germany. And she had a memory of soldiers coming to the house and making the adults lie on the ground and then stepping over them in really big boots, and that was like a very sort of terrifying moment for her. And then this is just another image from the left. Image is from a sketchbook and the one on the right is a small painting done with airbrush and acrylic. And just to show that sometimes my sketchbooks and my paintings are in conversation, but I don't usually, or I hadn't until very recently, actually started using those sketchbooks as a basis for a painting. And then here, sort of as a way of bringing more psychological, information into the work, I was using the pattern on the person's robe to kind of almost like how a cartoonist like has multiple frames on a page. So this was my way of kind of splicing in more, emotion or more information, at least, into a painting. So the whole time the sketchbooks were also just existing as a parallel practice. By now I have, I actually don't know exactly how many, but a lot, many different kinds of sketchbooks. And they were very intimate to make. I would make them, as I said, on the subway, on the bus, also at home, carried around with me at all times in all different mediums. And I was very rarely caught, by another person, because the bus is actually really good because people are very absorbed. And of course, with the advent of cell phones, people just are looking at their phones constantly and they don't notice what you're doing. But on the rare occasion that someone would notice, they actually almost never minded. And it's just a way for me of really, looking at my fellow human beings and noticing also, I always notice, like, not always, but there are particular art historical connections that came up for me. Like I thought that this guy very much looked like this guy on an old Greek vase. And as you can see, many different mediums, and then this sort of like collapsed space of a drawing like this. And then I work at an art restoration studio, and we happen to have a painting in, not actually this is from a book of Botticelli's paintings, but similarly, like things would make me notice, like, oh yeah, they do the crowds like that with all of the profiles stacked together. And that's how it is on the subway. And then here, I'm just sort of winding up with showing you, this is like last summer, I started making some paintings, like, as I said, very directly from the sketchbook drawings. So, but yet, of course, they're very different. They're different in mood. They're different because I can never help, like, I didn't want to make sort of an exact replica. It wasn't the point, but to sort of add in, I started adding in backgrounds and other stuff. And yeah, like this is a larger painting that was a composite also of multiple sketchbooks.
Angela, would you mind sharing the presentation from your screen? Because I'm afraid if I share it, it's gonna.
Absolutely, I got it. I'm on it.
Thank you. So yeah, thanks so much for inviting me to be part of the show and this conversation. I'm really excited. I'm gonna jump right in. I'm Joiri Minaya, Dominican United Statesian artist, as Angela said earlier, based in New York normally, although I'm in Florida right now. And I wanted to start with the work that Angela is about to put in there, called #Dominican Women Google Search, because it's a piece that kind of got me thinking into this virtual space and identity, and how identity is performed for others, how others demand identity be performed, how ideology shapes algorithms, and yeah, how this like search engine shows you this identity. So I looked up this, I did this Google search in 2015, after having moved to New York and kind of experiencing life in the US as someone with an accent that looks a certain way and is a woman, and then has like all of this associations and questions and ideas kind of projected onto. So I guess as a millennial, something that I was curious is like what informs these ideas about Dominican womanhood, and what I did was looking it up on Google. So I found this grid of like various women depicted in very like monolithical ways. And I started doing collage and eventually printed out those collages as kind of life-size sculptures, flat sculptures, something in between, I guess, the flat space and the three-dimensional space, and then circling back into the digital space. You can go to the next one. It's a video of the installation and how it moves, because the image kind of represents it in one way, but the video gives you this other view. And pixelation became important. I remember reading Hiro Steyer's In Defense of the Poor image. That was great to think through this piece. The backside of the pieces is covered with shirts that I found in thrift stores, tropical shirts. I was thinking a lot about like this flat surface representation of the Caribbean where I come from, and through like this touristic machinery, I guess, and then how that imagery kind of is extrapolated to so many places regardless of site specificity. So but also how these bodies are represented with some of these tropical landscapes, and how they're kind of a stand-in for each other. You can go to the next slide. And then from that, to the next slide. From that installation, I started doing some, before that installation, I started doing some collages, although in 2020 and recently I've gone back to some of these collages. So this one is recent, but with the same logic of what I was doing at the moment, which was kind of thinking through opacity and this idea of like the body and the landscape, and trying to find moments of agency through denying the availability of that body for consumption in the way that I was seeing it in those images. You can go to the next slide. And you can also go to the next slide. That informed a body of work that I started after the #Dominican Women Google search, which is called Containers. It's a series of photos and performances where I sew these bodysuits and use them to encase myself normally, although in the performances I use other bodies and spread them around spaces, so the audience kind of encounters these bodies and people in different spaces and in different ways. But for the photo series, it's usually me. So container number 2 is like thinking about these ideas of camouflage. You can go to the next one. Number 3 is also like, I think more specifically about these poses. So going back to that Dominican Women Google search installation, the ways that women were posing in the Google search results were started becoming repetitive as I was looking at them, and formulaic. So I kind of started classifying those formulas and sewing these bodysuits out of those poses. So the bodysuit is kind of forcing the performer to embody this pose. So like the hands are sewn together like that. There's like a hole through which you stick your head. You can go to the next one. And also thinking of ideas of hypervisibility, and also like in relation to this lineage of like the odalisque, Orientalism, exoticism, which permeates a lot of the imagery that I was being confronted with. You can go to the next one. And most recently, this is like the most recent image I made last year of this series. Container number 7, it was taken at a greenhouse in the New York Botanical Garden. And it's the first image in the series where the background, I totally forgot to talk about the landscape where I take these photos in. So like I'm interested in spaces that look natural but are man-made. And I think this one is the most obvious one for that. But I found that backdrop in the greenhouse. It's like a vinyl print of a jungle that is placed up on a door where like you're not supposed to go into. It's like staff only. But it kind of echoed the whole surrounding and the constructions of the surrounding, the constructions of the bodysuit. You can go to the next slide. I think it should be a video of the performance. And I'm going to shut up for a minute because I have some audio. I don't know if you will be able to listen to it. Is it? Well, I guess the audio is not playing, but let me see if I can remember. Camouflage, or how to lose your native accent in 5 quick steps. Whenever you forget, there will be someone there to remind you, diligently pointing out your difference. You can pretend to be all sorts of universal things, but a stare, a tone, a question about your provenance, or a damn will bring you back to your brown, female, perceivably foreign body. Having the mental space to fantasize about gardens and the universe is a privilege. And I think this part talks about how Morisot, who was a French artist, went to Venezuela on an expedition and drew plants that he later used to create pattern design. And I can't remember what the rest of the audio says. Oh, I think this one says, I'm not the landscape, I'm not the motherland, I'm framing the composition. And at this point, she takes up the body. So throughout the, thanks, Claudia, throughout the performance, there's this audio that is playing that dictates shifts for each performer to go in and out of the bodysuit. So they're constantly putting the bodysuits on and off. And then this gesture of the bodysuit is then extrapolated to monuments. You can go to the next slide. To monuments that I started covering, shifting that gesture of like covering up these women's bodies in this, I'm blanking out on the word, but these bodysuits that constrain them in specific poses, to thinking about the places where like these colonial histories are juxtaposed with this tourist histories, and thinking about like where these constructions come from, and then are extrapolated to the female body, but kind of going back to the origin. I started proposing this monument coverings. This one didn't happen. What you're seeing is a Photoshop montage that was printed later onto postcards, and the audience in the exhibition was invited to write down their ideas of like my proposal of covering this Columbus monument in the Bahamas. You can go to the next slide. But then in 2019, I did get to cover some monuments in Miami of Christopher Columbus and Ponce de Leon. And because I got that permit, I started thinking about this patterns that I had been using in my work that are, again, stereotypical and interchangeable. So I ended up doing site-specific research about like how people used plants to defend themselves from colonial regimes. So what you're seeing is the castor plant, which is a plant that I'm not going to go into it, but it has physical poison and also healing properties, and then it has spiritual ideas of healing connected to the plant as well. So Columbus was covered with that pattern that I designed based on that research. You can go to the next slide. Ponce de Leon is covered with a pattern that features manchineel, which is a plant that was used by the Calusa natives to poison their arrows, and actually one of these poison arrows struck Ponce de Leon and killed him. You can go to the next slide. And most recently, I covered the Columbus tattoo in Santo Domingo. But I wanted to end with, you can go to the next slide, more recent works that go back to the idea of the containers, but kind of are focused in the act of taking off the bodysuit, and kind of freezes that moment as I'm thinking about ideas of agency and removing this skin and this formulaicness, this performativity, and the pattern that is behind these digital compositions. These are digital collages based on photos that I took of myself, except for the last one, which is actually a photo that documents a moment in the performance from 2017. For this installation in general, I was thinking of camouflage. This is a pattern design that was designed here in the States after the war, that people were using in the interior of their houses as a way of escaping the harshness of that moment. But I was thinking of like escapism and that kind of experience of like middle class, wallpaper inside your house. But also the installation is in Kansas City at the Kemper Museum. And when I went there, I went to this place called Quindaro, which is the ruins of a place that was important for the abolition movement, where self-emancipated formerly enslaved people got a moment of like hiding as they were continuing to travel north. So thinking about these contrasting ideas of escape and landscape, and also breaking down the landscape. So I ended up painting different layers of this original pattern and juxtaposing them in a way where it wouldn't be reorganizing them in a way that I was thinking of as liberating the representation of landscape from that like oppressive formula that it uses. You can go further. And this is just close-ups to the different compositions in that series. You can keep moving. And for it, I used patterns that were to me more nuanced. They were still tropical, and from the things that I have been collecting as this tropical pattern, one of them is like right behind me. But to me, they were more nuanced than the ones that I had been using before, and I hadn't found a way to use them in the serious containers before. So I ended up scanning these patterns and using them for the collages. Thank you.
No, thank you. That was amazing. And I just want to see more of that work. And I know that we've run right to the very 2 minutes over the actual expenditure of the time that we were allotted. But and there's a normally with this sort of like we end and there's a the people hang out, but we all volunteer to just run a little bit over and try to answer some questions. I know Carol Saft asked a couple of questions. We really want to like have a discussion for at least like, the next 15 minutes or so, considering how long we've run. Love to hear these amazing voices that are on this call at this point still. Yeah. All right. So Peggy Awash, is your essay Phantom Limb online? Peggy, I'm going to answer that one first because I sent it to you over the summer, actually, and because I thought you might like it. And it was when I read it, in fact, I was like, oh, God, Peggy. And I kept thinking about she, and I was thinking about the beautiful film that you did, with the clips from the Genesis film made by those weirdo Christians. And I just, with And the Phantom Limbs, I instantly thought of that piece. So just to let you know, but I'll send it to you again. All right.
Put it in the chat.
Right. Okay. Someone help me.
I'll do it.
And Carol, the third body. Yes, the third body, Peggy. Love you, Peggy. I wish. Okay, Carol Saft writes a visual noise, and this originates back at like 7 o'clock. You know, at the proper time when the when the Q&A should have started. But it's a great question, Carol. As visual noise, if up will envelops us, would you say we are cracked open, made vulnerable, and thus able to be receivers? I don't know. I'm not going to answer that. I'm going to defer to everybody else, but I just want to say that that is a just beautifully cadenced sentence. I'll start out with that.
Can you just repeat the last part of that?
Yes, there's such a
Are we?
it's so beautifully written, actually. We are cracked open, made vulnerable, and thus able to be receivers. What do you think of that, Ragona?
I love that. I think it's fantastic because it also opens up affective space, which is what I'm trying to get at through thinking about a kind of visual noise. Although I'm calling it phantom noise, just because I'm, you know, in phantom, we're still playing with that because it does come out of Andrew's essay. But for me, I feel like somehow I want to get beyond it too, because it's kind of it's an overused representation for this kind of affective space that we're examining throughout the works. But I love that I absolutely think that's true, that it brings viewers in, it's immersive, and it invites participation and listening to visual cues.
Andrew, did you have an idea about that?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment real quick. The original article I wrote was specifically about figurative painting. And Angela and Melissa both have kind of helped open this idea up to broadly incorporate sculpture and performance and video and film. And so, you know, Phantom was something that I thought worked applying to this idea of virtuality and visuality, but I think sound and affect are getting into a more exciting place.
Anyone else?
I wish Carol could chime in and say like what, like I want to just be like, what do you mean visual noise? Do you mean like Instagram, TV, websites, everything, Zoom, like Zoom panels? Like what are we talking about here? Because yes, there is a lot of visual noise. I mean, it's like a barrage. I personally feel like smashing my phone with a sledgehammer about 3 times a day. But I like the thing about the cracked open, made vulnerable, able to be receivers. Totally reminded me of like seances and that kind of thing. Speaking of the old kind of Phantom, which I know you don't really want to talk about. So I don't know, Carol, if you're still out there, can you send us a Ouija board message?
I just wanted to say, I also think about it. I don't know if Joiri does, but I do in relationship to your work, Joiri, because it seems like from this patterning that you create in these containers, that there's this tremendous history that just comes out of it without even saying it, even though you do narrate some of that in your videos. Would you say that's also true, like in your making of the work, or just how you're looking at it now? I just see a lot of visual fabulous noise that's implied and not implied directly.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think part of that noise is like that repetitiveness and like how I find this formulaicness in those patterns. Although like the newer, most recent approaches to patterns that I'm thinking through in my work have got me thinking about, especially with that last installation, divergences, marronage, and like this history of camouflaging into nature as a way to gain freedom. I mean, the historical marronage of like enslaved people, but also the contemporary takes on marronage as like a philosophy to escape, I guess, coloniality and modernity, and think through new ways of existing.
I think to throw in maybe another way of answering Carol's question possibly would be, like, I do think something that came up multiple times in the talk that I was interested in is I feel like everyone's dealing with bodies that are withheld from us. So their meaning seems to be very withheld and deferred. Like Dwayne talking about this coyote that comes into the studio that he can't access completely and is mysterious to him. Joiri thinking of camouflage, opacity, you know, and Caitlin certainly creating what Melissa calls like the force field and Angela calls the force field. It maybe to think about this virtual noise that's happening, they might be related, because it seems like the singular event or like the liberal subject is being withheld from us, and it's opening up access to groups and communities and like more of like a coalition of forces, because the true nature of like an individual seems to really get farther and farther away because of virtual experience. Maybe could be a good.
Wonderful, I think. But I think also in terms of like thinking about like what we point our gaze at too, I think about Mala's work and how like past the mores, past the protection, this kind of radicalized empathy to be able to observe and see that moving, running figure, that is the ability to see that is something that is also not included in the neoliberal subject as well.
Completely. And that gets into Yves Satan's ecologies of attention, which is like the kind of the poignant question of our time is, what do we attend to, you know? And I do think artists still have the role of showing us what to attend to, dream space and everything.
Wow.
Anyway,
Anyway,
Caitlin, like, what did she call it? An inaudible. Maybe she'll answer in the chat. An inaudible, and I quoted that. I just can't find it now. An inaudible sound, but she's also pointing to the way information works in her work, like that, like you had just brought up the moire patterns, the aurora patterns, and that tension between those kinds of technologies and then figuration or color, right? Or the 2D space of painting. So that tension, I think, is constantly in her work in such powerful ways. And then the popular clubs and, you know,
pole dancing,
culture exploring is constantly there, sounding.
Well, and I think it gets, I mean, Caitlin's work, which we could do a whole panel on, it really is, it's about that, the image, everyone should see those paintings in person because they're so compressed, they look like JPEGs, but in person they're so material and painterly and thick, the paint's very thick. And why I say she's one of the best colorists is because she's mixing neon colors and neutralizing them and stepping them down in a way that's very hard to do. But I think, she's turning these, like the Claremont twins and Cardi B, these black femme bodies into a decorative pattern that's flattened, but also reverberating with the scene and the sociality, the ground behind them. And I think to me, it's like really understanding that the true intent, the meaning of Cardi B will always be withheld from us because she was introduced into a medium in a form that made it impossible for us to ever understand her as anything more than like a meme or like a very superficial and flattened way of like understanding her. She's either erotic or funny or like outlandish, but we don't really understand and can't really know, you know, these figures that she's painting. And so the moire and the solarization is such an effective strategy for that in painting.
although I must say, I really did understand and felt deeply connected to her when she was looking at Giuliani in that video when the hair dye was dripping from his head and she was like, "What is that?" I'm like, exactly. What the fuck is motherfucker. Anyway, yeah, Vic has the question for Joiri. Joiri, do you see it, or do you want me to read it to you?
Yeah. I'm gonna read it out for the recording, I guess. I can't believe how integrated the pattern and figure in your work works. That seems very virtual. Is that important to you? I don't know which work you're talking about, but some of it is virtual. Some of it is like absolutely super 3D, real life, crafty, handmade. But I feel like image wise, a lot of it has that quality. I don't know if it's important that it's virtual to me, but that quality is important to me. Except for like works that are specifically in relation to the virtual space and identity as it is performed there, like hashtag Dominican in the Google search, then for sure. And then the recent collages, they're done in my computer, but it's also like a lot of physicality involved in it because I'm performing for the camera, taking images. From those images, I make collages. And then some of those textures are actually fabrics that I buy and scan and rescan and like juxtapose. Like there's this mesh that is kind of transparent that has some pattern, and I like double it, and it has like this weird effect that maybe resembles moire. Oh geez, sorry. So yeah, I think for sure like screens and virtual spaces are like becoming more and more like of our daily existence, part of our daily existence, and that kind of makes me think a lot of like Legacy Russell's glitch feminism, for example, and how she's articulating some of these ideas of like identity in the virtual space and refusal and kind of expansiveness within that. So yeah, I mean that's definitely things that I'm thinking about as I'm making this work. And I guess it is important, but I mean it depends on the work.
It's funny when I brought up Derek Wood's Moro, he cited directly Legacy, the glitch feminism. It was really great to hear that.
It's such a great text.
Such a great text. Oh, there's so many more things in the chat. There's Andrew's article. There's wonderful props from Claudia. And a lot of comments from Carol. Carol, we love you, darling. And I think we should metabolize that on the other side and call this complete. I really just want to thank these wonderful people. Joiri, Melissa, Mala, Andrew, and of course the Fine Arts Work Center. Again, I don't even know if I made that point clear enough in the beginning, but these ways in which artists are able to spend time outside of these matrices of success and production and articulation that force us to perform in certain ways that we can actually spend time in a community of people exploring ideas without any verifiable outcomes or meanings. And discovering the politics along the way is just a great gift to everyone who goes through that space. And it's just something that we all support, and which is why we've donated our time tonight. So everyone, thank you so much.
Thank you, Angela Dufresne. Fabulous for organizing this and bringing your team along with you. It was really wonderful and fun, and for your work.
Mention next Thursday, April 29th, 6 p.m. Eastern. We hope you'll join us for Art and Activism, a conversation with Mira Shore and Anoka Faruqi. Woo! Thank you.
Good.